Oh boy. Now we get to talk about our three favorite things to talk about are Redcat, DJI, and dogs and drones.
That's true. Yeah.
Well, today we got some Redcat news.
And
But it's not what you think.
Yeah, Redcat might not be in the news as much now based on this information. Because basically, we've talked about Redcat a lot because their consumer division, which is Rotor, Riot, and Fat Shark. And today we have learned that they plan to divest to their consumer division. So basically, they are selling off Rotor, Riot, and Fat Shark to a company.
Blah, 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 blah. Boil it down for me, Plenty.
Yeah, so basically it's like a $15 million value, I believe, something like that in different pieces. They are keeping stock options in the new company. This company is called Unusual Machines. They have a cash page on Google it's kind of generic, but basically it's a company that just changed from another name called AeroCarve US. And if you take a look at the agent name on this listing we have from Unusual Machines and the agent and incorporator of this company, we find that is Jeff Thompson. And we know Jeff Thompson is the CEO and owner of Redcat.
Yes.
So my guess here is basically they're divesting off into a separate company, right? That Jeff Thompson will it seems to be at least be the incorporator of, they're divesting that off into a different thing so they can focus on, they talked about, I heard a investor call today. I sat on the investor call. Basically they said that they're focusing on defense. Redcat is. So they're selling off this consumer division. They're launching a new drone. They're going to ramp up teal production with the money they're getting from this. And basically they're focused on defense, and they feel like Rotor, Riot, and Fat Shark have suffered. So they're basically slinging them off to this new company, which seems like it'll be still Jeff Thompson, but maybe consumer focus versus commercial military focus.
One of the takeaways from this, when I first saw it, I was like, oh man, I mean, Redcat is just kicking them to the curb. Like, from a business perspective, it sort of makes sense. Like, I've always wondered what Redcat's interest in Fat Shark and Rotor Riot is, because on the one hand, they are companies with revenue. I was going to say profitable, but I'm not 100% sure whether that's true. And so it makes sense why someone who's trying to get a company together like Redcat would want them in their sort of portfolio. But on the other hand, they're not what's going to take Redcat like to the moon. It's going to be a giant government contract for teal or something like that. And so I'm like, well, so when I heard they were selling them, I was like, okay, but they're not really kicking them to the curb, are they? It's sort of like Jeff Thompson, who owns and founded Redcat, is going to also own and found Rotor Riot and Fat Shark, just under a different corporate entity.
It seems to be the case from the publicly available information we have and our best to guess to what we can see. That does seem to be the case. I mean, I think from a business perspective, it does make sense to split these. And like you said, for me, my guess would be that a large, when we've talked about Redcat in the last year or two, a lot of our conversation has been about the fact that their revenue is from Rotor Riot and Fat Shark. That's where they get the revenue from. That's all the on-book revenue, because Teal hasn't sold anything or didn't sell anything till like 3 to 6 months ago. And so if you're a company who, made all this money in an IPO and then wants to show investors that you're doing something, I think having revenue, even if it's from a consumer and you're focused on teal, I think that helps tide over investors over time. And maybe, maybe that's not the case, but to me, having that 5, 6, 7 million, whatever it was in revenue, helps them feel a little better about, hey, we're not doing anything as a company otherwise. We're building up production, we're spending a bunch of money on a teal, and all these things are happening, and we're looking at contracts, and we're talking to people, and Skypersonic's got a deal going on with Mars stuff, and there's all these pieces, but they don't fit together that well, I think, without this. And it seems to me like, Teal is putting in drones for Tranche 2 now. In 3 to 6 months, they'll be ramping up to thousands of drones a month. They have contracts with NATO companies. So I think we're seeing, now they know they don't need the consumer piece anymore. Now they can just stay focused on military. They don't have to worry about that at all.
Except, and I know I shouldn't take the things that they say in investor calls as anything except marketing. I get that. But at the same time, there's been this story that drone pilots are the cutting edge of drones, FPV racing, and we're going to take these hotshot pilots and use the things that they do to test in the crucible of FPV, and then we're going to roll it out to the, I don't know. That's how they fit into the portfolio. And then it's like, well, it turns out no.
From my limited investor call stuff, it seems like, like we talked about before, they kind of get on the edge of where reality lives, right? So
Right.
I think he's just pitching a world in which that could happen, and now they've realized that pivoting makes the most sense. So
Nobody
it'll be
nobody
interesting
out
to
and
see.
out lies in investor calls, because that gets you in trouble with the SEC. But they
Yeah.
sure do push the edge of what is aspirational. I don't know.
Also, I just want to point out here, one of the other things here, we talked about, basically it's 18 million was the deal, 5 million in cash, 2.5 million in convertible senior note, 10.5 million in Series A convertible preferred stock of unusual. So part of this will be all focused on the fact that this has to close so that there's an IPO of this new company that Jeff Thompson is part of. And then it must be a minimum amount of $15 million and approved as a NASDAQ listing to be for everything to finish, to be complete.
That's a pretty big
basically,
if,
at
isn't
the
it?
end of all this, what's that? Oh,
I'm sorry, that's a pretty big if, isn't it? I mean, they did the whole reverse merger thing to avoid having to do a legitimate IPO with Redcat.
It seems likely, but I wonder if this is some way to divest risk. I don't know anything about how this investment stuff works, but that may be the case. Is it some kind of way to divest risk if if it doesn't happen? But it does seem the case that they want to still have an IPO'd version of this consumer drone stuff, so they can do stuff with public investment and all these pieces. They just need it in a different company now. So
all right.
it'll be interesting to see how all this unfolds.
It's Not Sam in the Discord says, seems to me that Jeff Thompson picked up $10.5 million in Redcat stock without paying for it.
Unusual stock technically, but yes. Yeah. So it's in the new company stock.
Interesting.
Well,
this new company is going to owe us for the stock. And guess what? The same guy owns the new company, so he gets the stock. Okay. Well, just a lot of paper shuffling. Who knows what this means for Rotor Riot and Fat Shark? Only time will tell. Everybody's gonna. I mean, I reached out to Drew when I saw this, and there is no public statement at this time, but it's still very fresh. Everybody's going to put the best face on it and tell you it's this is good for us and this is good for FPV, and then time will tell how it actually plays out. We shall see. There we go.